Hey YouTube, it's Wes. Hope you guys are doing great today. So if you've been paying any attention to the crypto news lately, you know this one incontrovertible fact. Regulation is coming to the crypto space here in the US. Now, what is it going to look like? When will it take place? How aggressive will it be? And what kind of damages will it do to crypto in the short term? And are there any advantages to regulation coming? Well, in today's video, we're going to talk about some early analysis and some early thoughts of what I think is going on and some under the covers peeks at some of the news articles that are driving some of the discussion that's happening. And I'm going to talk about what this is going to mean for you and me in the short term, as well as some long-term ramifications. You don't want to miss this critical video. All of this and a whole bunch more coming right up. Hey, my friends, thank you guys so much for joining as we talk about the futures of crypto regulation. Wes Spencer here. It is so good to be with you guys today as we're going to talk about what all of this means. Now, if we're first meeting, welcome to my channel. Super glad you're here. I am a technologist. I'm a cybersecurity guy, and I absolutely love cryptocurrency. All of those things just kind of jump together right here in this channel. I'm not a full-time YouTuber, never going to be, so I'm not here to moon pump. I'm not here to do price speculation. I'm just here to talk about the things I care about and use this as a conduit just to share with all of you guys, my amazing followers. And by the way, if you're not following me yet, there's so many ways you can do that right here on YouTube. Hit like and subscribe, and definitely hit that bell icon. Goes a long way for you to stay in touch with me. Also, check me out on LinkedIn, check me out on Twitter, and then right down there is an easy way for you to jump in with me in a better way. It is the memberships. I have that available now. I'd love for you to consider checking that out and joining if that is a good fit for you. Now, here's the way we should probably start this. I'm used to regulators. So I don't talk about this often in my channel, but I used to be a banker. I spent several years as a CIO at a bank working with and among federal regulators. I even had some opportunities in some of the nonprofit cyber threat sharing groups that I was a member of. I was elected as a chair of a very large group in that, and even spent some time in Washington, D.C. talking to regulators. Now, I was talking primarily on the banking side and on the cybersecurity side, but I learned a lot of things about regulators. I learned how they think. I learned how they operate. I learned about some of their deepest, darkest fears. And we're going to talk about how some of that involves what we're seeing in the news right now and the cycles around crypto. So probably the best way to start is let's do a quick recap through some of like memory lane a little bit that's happened in the past week or so. And this will really get us kicked off in what we're going to be talking about today. So many of you probably saw this article. This is all about the Coinbase Lend program. Coinbase Lend has been planned for quite some time with Coinbase. It's sort of their answer to a lot of the other platforms that are out there that I am a big fan of, like the unbanking, non-banking crypto lending platforms like Celsius. You guys know I'm a huge fan of Celsius. I've done a bunch of videos all about Celsius, how it works, why it works, some of the cybersecurity reviews. You can see all of that down below. And if you're interested in joining in Celsius, I do have a referral code. I am not paid by Celsius to do anything for them. I just am a big fan. I put a lot of my money where my mouth is with them, and you can too if it's the right choice for you. Now, never listen to YouTubers. If you listen to people like me for all of your financial advice, you're going to go broke. You shouldn't listen to us for any of those things. Make your own wise decisions after doing your own due diligence and consider all of the tax and CPA professionals that you need in your journey. Okay, so going back to Earn. Here's what happened with it. They were planning on giving out 4% for those that stored their crypto with Coinbase, and Coinbase was going to return that with a 4% APY, which is really good. Now, it's not quite as competitive as some other competing platforms like Celsius, BlockFi, and others, but something interesting happened. Even though it was a very competitive product, the SEC squashed it, and they said, no, you're not going to do that. If you do, we are going to sue you. They sort of drew a red line in the sand. And that was shocking to a lot of people, thinking, why would they do that? Like, what's their big deal? Why are they picking on Coinbase when others are doing the same thing? Well, there's a lot of reasons why they would call Coinbase out in particular, both because of their nature of being an exchange and the prevalence of how much and how involved they are in this whole space. and even more things that I don't have time for in the video. But let's just pause it here. Initially, Coinbase reacted very, very aggressively and saying, we're going to fight this. And then they eventually backpedaled. They kind of saw the light and they said, fine, we're going to cancel the Lend program. And that was one of the big kickoffs to really getting people to start to see what's going on. Why are regulators are they anti-Coinbase? Are they anti this Lend program? Are they anti-crypto? Like, what's happening here? So you can read this article. As always, all of my articles will be in the description down below, so you can check out all of that. But two things from the article I do want to cover. I want to read this quote right here. This is just an update from Coinbase as they decided they weren't going to aggressively fight the decision by the SEC. They said, look, as we continue to work to seek regulatory clarity for the crypto industry, we've made the difficult decision to cancel the Lend program. We've canceled the waiting list. The whole thing has just been completely canceled. As we scroll down even further down into all of this, we see a little bit more around this. Listen to this quote right here from specifically Coinbase. They said the SEC told us they considered Lend to involve a security, but they wouldn't say why or how they reached that conclusion. We opened a wait list, but they didn't set a launch date for it. But all of a sudden, the SEC said no. And we see specifically SEC Chief Gary Gensler say, nope, we're not going to allow any of that. So let's talk about Gary Gensler a little bit more, and let's understand kind of their thought processes. So this came out yesterday from CoinDesk, and I think this is a really interesting article that really gives us a bit of a deeper peek into what's happening with not just Coinbase Lend, but the intentionality of where federal regulators are going as a whole. So here is SEC Chief Gensler, and he calls stablecoin, at least this is like the headline caption among many things that he said when he spoke to Congress, was he calls stablecoins the poker chips in the Wild West crypto casino. That is a pretty interesting and, I don't know, accusational sort of statement. Now, we're not going to break down everything in this article, but there's a few things that I think are pretty relevant for all of us. The first thing that he says here is, he believes the SEC, we have robust authority to regulate the cryptocurrency industry. So not only does he think it falls in the square kind of target of where the SEC should have authority, he wants the authority to regulate the crypto industry. He is hungry to do so. He is going to Congress and he is asking for additional authority to be able to regulate the crypto space. Now, a lot of people will come back and say, well, good luck with that. How are you going to regulate a completely decentralized industry that was built from the ground up by Satoshi to be a platform and a technology that bypasses regulation as a whole? Well, I think in theory, that is possible. It is true that you can continue to run an anonymous and completely decentralized technology that runs on blockchain and do those things. But in order to work with people in everyday worlds that allow buying and selling and all of the things that an exchange might do, the fact is regulators are going to have the capability to have their claws into this entire system, whereas currently they don't. So I think the reality is somewhere in the middle. Regulators are going to regulate, and they're going to find ways to do that, even when theoretically they're regulating a system by its nature that has been created and designed from the beginning to be regulation proof. It's actually not so much when it comes to the average users like you and me that want to buy and sell and operationalize in these platforms, right? And so there's a few more things I think are important to kind of talk about. One of the things that Chief Gensler kind of complains about is, you can see this right here in this quote, he talks about the exchanges and he says these platforms should come in and they should figure out how to register with the SEC. He means not many have, and so I fear that we'll keep bringing these enforcement cases and there's going to be a problem. And frankly, when that happens, I think a lot of people are going to get hurt. There's so much to unpack into all of that. First of all, one thing that he neglected to share, at least in my view, is how are users going to get hurt? I think a lot of that is abstract and can even border on the fear mentality, right? That fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And I think that's kind of important for us to think about is, I believe, look, if they want to regulate it, I understand why they do. Like, it's what they do. It's what the SEC is all about as primarily a regulator. I think, but beyond that, they need to really be able to express not just this, oh, there's abstract fear and stablecoins are evil because they're going to hurt a lot of people. You need to elaborate specifically on where and why. But he talks about this even more. He talks about this right here, and this is really what I want to hone in on from the article that really got me thinking. He does understand. He talks about even the original creation of Bitcoin itself is something that, look, it was innovative, and he wants to regulate the crypto space, but also not dampen and hamper innovation. So he talks about how innovative the crypto space has been. He recognizes that. He recognizes that this has changed for central banks and how the private sector handles payment systems, many of which are archaic, they're old, they're unfair to individual consumers, which is a real shame. And he understands that crypto from the beginning has desired to want to upset that. You can go back to the Genesis block and block 1 of Bitcoin and even see this. The very news article from the very first Bitcoin block ever mined was Satoshi posting a link to the bank bailouts way back in 2008 and 2009. So we know this, and they see it this way as well. And he says this, or at least the article says this, despite the benefits to innovation, however, Gensler stressed the importance of proactive crypto regulation. And again, he inserts the fear here. I don't think it's a good idea to wait until there's a spill in aisle 3, using a supermarket analogy. If we don't do something about it, there's going to be a spill, and I just think it's going to be really bad. I'm paraphrasing, you get the idea here. So this really kind of gets into more of the meat of the article. Why are they so against both stablecoins and wanting to, where's the fear coming from? Well, let's talk about this for a minute. 2 different articles I want to talk about that I want to share with you that I think are really, really insightful. This comes from a Wealth of Common Sense blog, and it's a really nice article. It's a very high level, simple article that both talks about the Coinbase Lend program being canceled that I started this video with. And additionally, something even more interesting is why they're against stablecoin high interest rate earning, or I should say why they want to regulate that space. And so the article talks about this. And one of the things they talk about, and you know this and I know this, is typical bank accounts, like savings accounts, pay very little. Gone are the days when you would have multiple points of interest. Instead, you're going to earn 0.1%. You might find a bank that gives you up to 1% under certain circumstances, but we know the cost for banks to store and keep your money are very, very difficult and cause interest rates to be so completely low. Compare that to a measly 4% with Coinbase Lend, is what allegedly it was going to be, or a much higher rate, all the way up to maybe 8% with something like Celsius. You can see there's a stark difference in between the numbers that are there. So that brings up the question you see in this article. Why do stablecoins have such high interest rates? Why are they paying between 4 and 8% for you to store them when a dollar that I store with a bank is 0.1%? It must be in terms of how it's used. It must be in the value of the stablecoin itself and the capabilities that it brings. And this is very true. We're going to talk about this, and then this will give you a peek and understanding into why this has regulators very, very concerned. So to see that, let's go ahead and scroll down a little bit. And he linked in this article a communication with the BlockFi CEO, Zach Prince. And Zach even shows this right here. Unfortunately, this little play button is kind of in the way of the quote itself. So I'm just going to read it to you. He says, Zach from BlockFi says, the fundamental reason we're able to offer such high rates at like 6 to 8% on stablecoins, listen to this, it's really important. He says, is because this asset class in this ecosystem does not have access to the traditional financing options that more established sectors do. In other words, we have a supply problem. And what do we know when supply is low but demand is high? The price goes up really high. And this is exactly what's happening in the world of stablecoins. See, in other industries, when an investor wants to get involved in something and they need to borrow money to get into it, they can just go to a bank and they can say, I want to get into real estate. I want to get into stocks. I want to get into whatever. And the bank understands this, and the bank is willing and interested and ready to lend out that money. And so because of that, there's a lot of money in the system. There's a lot of supply in the system. And that makes it possible for us to have a robust, highly operating ecosystem, but it squeezes and keeps the rates of earning much lower. Flip that with crypto. Banks don't lend money for crypto. They just don't. Try going to your bank and saying something like this. Say, I want to pull out, a loan specifically to create a business, to become a hedge fund to allow me to buy crypto. I'm literally using this bank loan so that I can go buy a bunch of crypto right now and then trade it on a futures contract. Just as an example, the bank is going to say, no, we will never allow that. And that right there is the problem, is banks are not a lending source for crypto. And because they're not a lending source for crypto, it makes scarcity in cash or capital to get access to crypto very, very hard to find. And that is the key to understanding why these rates for crypto, especially stable coins, which are pegged to like a US dollar, are so lucrative. In fact, we can even go in deeper than this. I don't have time in today's video to really dive in fully into this Bloomberg article, but I will post it in the description because I want you to read it. And when you read it, they're going to talk about some really good things that really help you understand even more about why the rates are so high. But we'll talk about a couple things from this article because I think they're pretty important. Let me even share a few quotes that I think are pretty relevant here. So they talk about these non-bank firms, right, that are not banks, but they're involved in lending: BitGo, BlockFi, Celsius, Genesis, many of these that are out there. And they're the ones that are doing the lending. And it talks about this a little bit more. It says, the people with all the money, the banks, the brokerages, they're not in the space yet. Everyone wants to borrow dollars, but there's not enough dollars in the space. There's a huge cash shortage. Combine that with this right here. Banks typically are weary. They're weary to lend money to anything crypto related because they're scared of it. They know their own regulators are not very friendly to it. And so this creates this challenge where these non-bank entities can lend out for a much higher price because the scarcity is so low, which gives them, and this even shows it in the article, annualized returns that are between 20 and 40% because of this low scarcity, because of the low capital. And we can even go on and see more about all of this. We can even see kind of how this works. So here's an example of like how lucrative this is for these, they call them shadow banks, or these basically these groups that act like a hedge fund, like Celsius, for example, why it's so lucrative for them and others. So look at this paragraph right here. So one, just as a simple example, if you went back to March 15th, Bitcoin was trading at about $56,000. And the July future contract, so like the futures of what it's worth, is $60,000. And so you can look at the difference here between that spread. If you were to take that spread between the spot price of what price it was worth right then on March 15th, and then what it became, what it was eventually worth in July, you can see they do the math here, so you and I don't have to. It's a 7.7% spread between the cash and the futures. And they even go on. If you annualize that over that 137 days difference between the spot and the future, this equivalates to a 21% annual return. That is really high. So if a hedge fund can make 21% on all of this, then they can afford to find capital from people like you and me by saying, hey, look, if you'll just store your stablecoin with us, buy it and store it with us, then we will use that to make those financial transactions. We'll make 21%. We're happy to give up to 8% back to you because we are hungry for this capital. And that right there is the thing that scares regulators. That is the thing that gets them very nervous, saying, look, this is a market that is not regulated. There's no insurance behind any of this. Whether that's good or bad or right or wrong is way beyond the purpose of this article. But that is the thing that scares regulators. They want to see crypto continue to innovate. They want to see crypto continue to do some really amazing things so that the traditional banking systems can borrow some of that and use it on their own. But one thing that scares them way too much is a completely unregulated system that gives such high annual rates of return, at least the way the market currently is, that scares them far too much into what could happen if this whole thing completely squeezes and maybe crypto completely drops and takes a nosedive. What's going to happen to those earning rates and how much money is already lent out and the capital that's already been sent out? These are the things that really scare them. Just as an example here, if we scroll way down here towards the bottom of this article, they even talk about what's happened recently when Bitcoin slid from 62,000 to 55,000, and we know it's far lower than that now, in the low 40s. But this caused, again, a reduction, right? And all of a sudden now those rates of return, instead of 21%, it's 13%. Still really, really high. But those drops are causing, again, just like I mentioned, those squeezes. And so regulators are scared of what that's going to do. A lot of arguments could also be made to regulators over, hey, they're not just scared of what that could do, they're trying to protect their own. They're trying to protect the banks. And this is the argument that many people in crypto make, and I can absolutely see where their arguments come from on this. When they say, look, you're causing fear, and you're speaking fear without causing and giving like hard examples of where the risks might be in all of this, I don't like it. It feels like you're trying to protect your own. We've seen this happen before. You look at what happened in GameStop and AMC and how the federal regulators jumped into all of that as well. And again, this is way beyond the point of the video, other than just to say there are multiple views of how all this happens and multiple views of what regulators are doing, where they may be right, where they may be wrong, where they may be mistaken and don't know what they're talking about. But I do know this. Regulators are going to regulate. and they are going to continue to look at things that they see as unjust or risky to the market and to the ecosystem and try to keep it stabilized. But they're terrified of this. They're terrified of being looked at somebody that's causing antitrust issues. They're terrified of somebody causing them and calling them on the carpet saying you're anti-innovation. You see this all the time in the way that regulators speak. They're like, well, we need to regulate this and really understand and kind of pull this down to reality, but we also don't want to impact innovation. And so they're trying to balance all of this. And so this is why we're seeing all this flurry of articles and flurry of news coming out, is they're signaling to us regulation is coming, that the Congress is going to grant us that authority, and we are going to get our hands on all of this, and we are going to put a floor on some of the things that are happening by introducing in regulation. And that brings up, I think, the final point of this video is, what is that going to look like? I personally believe short term, it's going to hurt the space. It's going to cause prices to continue to fall if we continue to see heavy overbearing regulation. But do I think that regulation is going to completely ruin the crypto space as a whole? Probably not. It's far too innovative. It's a worldwide concept that everybody is getting involved, and some of the things that we're doing here in the States won't affect other countries that don't have that same level of regulation. You look at what's happening with El Salvador, just as an example. So we do know this. We do know the regulation that's coming is going to harm crypto, I think, in the short term, but hopefully in the long term, if regulation is done correctly and in a robust way, it will cause as little impact to users as possible. I know many of you may say that's wishful thinking, but the additional capability that comes with it of allowing it to continue to innovate and grow within a confined ecosystem may be healthy for it overall. The reality, though, my friends, is this. At some point, regulation was going to happen. It was going to come in. So let's hope that it comes in the right ways. Let's hope that it's introduced in ways that are still beneficial to all of us and not completely overhanded in destroying and wrecking everything. I'd love to know what you think. What do you think about regulation? How quickly do you think it's going to happen? What do you agree with or disagree with in this video? I've tried to make it as neutral as I can without too much politics slipping out in all of this, but I know that there's room for discussion on all of this, and I'd love to know from you what you think about all of this as well. Just drop me a comment down below. I'd love to know what it is that you think about all of this. And while you're here, if you haven't done it already, hit like, hit subscribe. It goes a long way for this channel. All right, my friends, thank you so much.